mask on. So, other
So,
than that, I'm fine.
You look good.
Thank you. Hey, Dave, sorry about your friend too, my friend.
Yeah, it's been a rough couple of weeks. Well, a rough year.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my heart goes out to you. Thanks for
Yeah.
helping. Thanks for helping him so much.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Tom Decker.
Tom Decker.
Wow.
Hi, Tom. I'm so glad you're here.
Hello, hello, everybody.
Hey,
Wow.
Tom.
Great. So good to see everybody in one place. It's hard to believe this was actually this is happening. I'm like starstruck a little bit here.
I like that word "work" on your chest.
Work hard. Be nice
Work
to
hard.
people.
And be nice.
There we go.
That's a
Yeah.
song, yo.
That-
Okay. So moving forward, Tom, I was just explaining our lineup and our plan for the next hour, but the idea is that this is an opportunity to record some Groovefest history, and we're going to show it as like history hour with some discussion and maybe music and pictures on Sunday, next Sunday for the 2020 Groovefest. So I'm going to kick it off with introducing what I know in the simplest terms. I haven't done my homework. I don't have a bio for each of you. And then if you would please introduce yourself, what you're doing now, and a little bit of how you're related. And then we'll just go ahead and get into the story and it'll flow pretty naturally. Is that fair? Okay. So my name is Aimee Rook, and I've been with Norman Groovefest since 2005, but my first Groovefest was when I was 17. And then in 2005, I joined the art committee, and in 2010, I took a leadership role when the OU Amnesty International chapter of students graduated, honestly. They matriculate and move on into their careers. So since 2010, 2011, we're no longer twice a year. It's only once a year in the fall, first Sunday of October. And we have bands and speakers perform, and I also work with Norman Mardi Gras Parade. But during the day, I'm an art therapist, and I really enjoy creative opportunity with friends and community, and that's why I'm here, because I believe that coming together creates a healthier community, like working together and sharing our stories, getting us into listening mode, ultimately advocating for those who really need a voice and need to be heard. So with that, I want to start with introducing David Slemmons. Seems to be our cheerleader, cohort, one of the original team members for Groovefest in the 80s, poet, activist, librarian, consummate artist, Renaissance man, friend of mine. David, take it away. Tell us about yourself.
Well, actually, my involvement in Groovefest is kind of interesting, is because I'd come back to finish up my Master of Fine Arts. And when I was working in the theater department, they did not let us really out of Rupel Jones or Old Science Hall when I was there in the 70s. And when I came back, they finally let me, they had just started Graduate Senate. And so they let me participate. And since I'd been involved in national student groups, going back to Ellison Hall was a delight. And Amnesty International had the office right smack in the front when you came in. And it was during this period of time that we did the renaming of DeBar Hall. And so it was because my connections with musicians, and then Alan and Tom, and that was sort of how I became involved, because I knew, and then Tom, Alan, and you know, people like Todd Walker, and of course, you know, Charles and Eric had been involved in Mandala, who I'd seen, you know, many times. So yeah. And Todd Walker, interesting, you know, was quite a character in terms of Groovefest, because I'm not sure, had he already done the Star Spangled Banner at the baseball stadium? But when that had happened, he was on the front cover of the Gazette because he switched out the Jimi Hendrix version of the Star Spangled Banner for one of OU's sporting events.
Whoa.
And he also, during the East Timor thing, actually contacted and talked to the leaders of East Timor about the Phillips 66 contract. So there were some really pretty amazing things that happened, you know, while we're talking about a band like Defenestration, or, you know, so there was like all kinds of interesting things that happened.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So how did this get started? Who wants to go first? Who was the one that said, hey, let's do this?
Alan?
Alan,
Well,
tell us your story.
I mean, hi, I'm Alan Healey. I was involved with Groovefest and with Tom Decker starting the OU chapter of Amnesty International. And both Tom and I, back when Jack organized the Conspiracy of Hope tour, were and have been big U2 fans. And I think it was Tom who responded to one of the 800 numbers saying, yes, I'm interested in Amnesty International in my community. And I don't think either one of us really ever expected or thought we might get a call, but lo and behold, a guy by the name of Say Carrick, who was running Amnesty International USA's office in Atlanta, called us and met with us at the United Methodist Church on campus, I want to say. And from there, we started the chapter. We got introduced to Eric Neuendorf, who had been putting on with some other musicians something that at the time was called Sunday in the Park. And we thought, we'd like to help you organize this. If you get the bands, we'll do the promotions and that kind of thing. And from there, it became, Amnesty International Groovefest, and we did it every fall and spring. And I think the thing that's important to remember in this moment compared to then is that apartheid was still in place, Mandela was in prison, the Berlin Wall hadn't fallen down, and at that time, as an Amnesty International chapter, whether you were a local chapter or a student chapter, you couldn't work on local human rights issues except for the death penalty. And that's how we ended up meeting Michael Johns and Sister Pat, who were running the coalition to abolish the death penalty. But the thing I will never forget, and then I'll hand it off. But we used to at Groovefest get up and talk about a current political prisoner, and I remember standing up and reading an urgent action that was calling for letters to get Václav Havel, who was a big Beatles fan and poet, released from prison. And so, the stuff that we were doing from Norman, Oklahoma, we were helping to make worldwide change, and look where we are now. But the great thing about Amnesty International, I think, is that rule has been relaxed. And so I know there's a lot of work going on domestic issues now, which are so important.
Got us into the doghouse many times doing the things on behalf of our brothers and sisters here locally, whether they be Native brothers and sisters or otherwise.
Tom Deckers, thanks for speaking up. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're working on these days?
Well, my name's Tom Decker. Worked with Alan and Eric Neuendorf at the very beginning of organizing Groovefest, and didn't have the wisdom to get the hell out of town quite as fast as Alan did. And so stuck around for probably, so if first Groovefest was 85, was actively involved in organizing Groovefest through the 90s, but I guess the 10th anniversary was really one of the last, so which would have been 95.
96.
96. And so for me, the ability to dial the 800 number, I very visually remember sitting on a bed in a hotel at somewhere in South Tulsa. There was a debate tournament. Alan and I had been actively involved in high school debate, and I was back at the hotel room, and I think it was HBO. I had on Jack talking on stage, and listening to Jack and hearing the music and understanding the connection of how people could come together caused me to dial the 800 number. And then we got the random phone call from Atlanta, and we met up and started the Amnesty chapter, and then got connected with so many different fellow conspirators of hope, and got deeply involved in the death penalty work, and working on Native issues with our brothers and sisters on campus and throughout the state. And for me, Amnesty and the Groovefest was always about the fact that we lived in the reddest of the red states. We lived in a space where there was very little opportunity to come together for change, and to be able to utilize the same mechanism that Jack had created, and then to be able to have Jack to come to Norman to be able to speak and to share what was going on locally, nationally, and internationally as it related to human rights was critically important, because we lived in a space where that wasn't top of mind and it wasn't easily accessible. And I'm quite confident it's still challenging, while at the same time the internet offers a whole lot more opportunity for community to come together. And so those first few Groovefests, I vividly remember that essentially the audience was the other people involved in organizing, for the most part, or those people that were connected to the people that were playing on stage. And that was the community. And as it grew from the first couple of Groovefests on through that first decade, it really became something that was a touchstone. And I remember walking through Times Square in Manhattan and seeing somebody wearing a Groovefest shirt and being excited about the fact that there was somebody who happened to be from Norman that was wearing the Groovefest shirt as I was walking through Times Square. And then to be able to introduce Jack, to be able to have him have that opportunity, but also to be able to introduce so many other people that were involved. And for me, the pinnacle somewhat came years later when watching the John Grisham documentary, where Ronald Williamson, in his own voice, was talking and telling the story of being at Andrews Park, having a community of young people invite him in, who had worked tirelessly on his behalf up to the 24 hours before he was to be executed, and then to be rejected by the community that his sister was connected to, and then to get the phone call. I don't even know the exact parameters of how that happened, so that somebody said, hey, Groovefest is happening on Sunday. Ronald and Dennis would like to be able to come and talk and say thank you for the work that you did. And then to hear Ronald in his own voice saying that moment, sitting in the bleachers at Andrews Park, eating an ice cream cone with the sun on his face, was the first moment that he felt free. And I was out on the street in front of my house here in Highland Park, listening to the audiobook, and hearing those words for the very first time, and it was mind-blowing.
Can I ask you about the first chapter of Amnesty International? Who was the university sponsor?
Who was the the faculty sponsor?
Yeah, I had heard from some that it was Dr. Henderson.
George Henderson said that it was the.
So,
there you go.
See, I think that's important information, especially for those who are just learning about Groovefest, to understand not only, the historical context. I mean, even Iran-Contra was going on at that time, 1986. It's something we were starting to wake up to, and understanding, what was going on behind the scenes, and whether that was, protecting the people or not. And
wasn't there even a connection of OU faculty to some of the interrogation methods going on?
Right.
Who was the professor that was deeply involved in recommending to the U.S. military how to interrogate.
Was it the ambassador? Was it the one that was the ambassador in El Salvador?
There was
Well,
There's a guy.
Yes
there was
and
a
no.
professor who brought Elliot Abrams to campus a couple times. I can't remember
Right.
his name, but there was someone in the political science department that fawned over Elliot Abrams.
Right,
Yeah,
and there was a whole thing about how his daughter got deeply involved in organizing Groovefest, and then there was some information passed back to her saying, you know, hey, apparently your dad's involved in the School of the Americas, School of the Americas down in Atlanta. Is that right?
It was at Fort Bragg, Georgia. Yeah, right.
Fort Bragg. And you know, she loudly proclaimed that there was no chance that her father would be involved in anything like that. And I think that was her last appearance as part of the Groovefest community, because she went back and confronted her dad, and
Found out
apparently he
the-
was.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's my
Yeah.
assumption.
Well, just from a historical point of fact, you know, Gettinger Hall on campus, which is no longer there, but the son was, you know, we've had a lot of major CIA connections, including President Bourne, who was head of the Intelligence Committee. I know when Rigoberta Menchú came, there was that aspect of the fact that, you know, people on the administration had actually been in Guatemala on the other side. So
Wasn't she the only commencement speaker never to give her address? There was the storms that came through, and they evacuated and got her
that's right. Yeah.
out of Lloyd
As
Noble.
far as we know, that's the only one that's never been allowed to give their speech.
And that then got moved to the native community at the old
Field
athletic,
house, or maybe,
at the
or
field
Arma-
house.
Yeah.
And
Jimi
I'm
Hendrix.
standing in the field house, and I was like, who's the guy in the cowboy hat over there? and it was Robert Redford. And somebody from the native community was connected to him, and he was a big backer of hers, and he had shown up with no press or anything to support her and to see her. And no photos, to my knowledge, were ever taken of him.
Wow.
Congressman Mike Sinar is the one that snuck him into that event. Because I remember talking to Mike Sinar weeks after that.
All right, Michael Johns, would you go ahead and introduce yourself? Give us some background so we understand your relationship to Groovefest.
Sure, I'm Michael Johns. At the time Groovefest started, I was a member of the Oklahoma City Amnesty International group. And I loved hanging out at record stores, as they were called then. And so I went into this record store, and I looked at all the posters they had on the windows. And I saw this thing about this event in Norman, Oklahoma called Groovefest that was sponsored by Amnesty International. And I thought, what the heck is this? And so I thought, well, I'm going to check this out. So I drive down there. And the first time looking at all the stuff going on, I thought this was amazing. And so I walk over to this table, and there's these two guys standing there at the table, one taller than the other. And I come to find out that it's Tom Decker and Ellen Healey. And that was kind of the beginning of the future. So it just kind of fell into my lap, but one of the greatest things that ever fell into my lap. I got really involved at that point, and my primary human rights issue was capital punishment. So, you know, I brought that and brought some resources into Groovefest with that. And, you know, at that time we knew that all the international issues were primarily being focused on. There's so much going on internationally that there wasn't a lot being looked at locally. So we tried to kind of turn that around so that the event could do that. And even though it was sponsored by Amnesty and it was limited on what it could pursue because of Amnesty's mandate, we always liked skirting that edge, because we knew the local human rights issues and the national ones were incredibly important to everybody here. So we just didn't feel like we could ignore that.
Particularly with a rapidly expanding incarceration rate, all the way up to the most women incarcerated in the nation. I mean, it's not something we're proud of, but it's something we need to always remember. So you were trying to prevent it then, and I do appreciate that. But you were telling me earlier about how your activism started. That you had a teacher?
Yes, I had a teacher in high school who taught history, and her name was Claire Looper. And I have to say, the first day of class was quite a shocker. She walked in and stood at the front of the room and said, "My name is Mrs. Claire Looper, and I've been arrested 28 times."
Getting in some
Now,
good trouble.
that was the beginning of the class. And so several weeks later, she came up to me, and she always called people by their last names, and she would say, "Mr. Johns," she says, "I want you to take this home and listen to it and then come back and talk to me about it." Well, it was an album of the Constitution of the United States. She said, "I don't want you to recite this to me, Mr. Johns. I want you to talk to me about it." And I thought,
Sure.
"Oh, okay." I thought, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." But I was intimidated because I wasn't like, I didn't have to memorize it. I just had to understand it. And the conversation I had with her several weeks later, I probably learned more about history at that moment than I've ever learned from any history book I've ever read. It opened my eyes to a lot of things that were not only going on in Oklahoma, but around the world. So she was always, a phone call away. She was listed in the phone book and with her phone number in there, and people could go over to her house and see her. I mean, it was just, she was an open book. And so I know I called her one time because we were organizing a protest at the Pardon and Parole Board over on Lincoln Boulevard. And I invited her out to protest. And so she shows up, and I'm kind of disjointed and disorganized out there. And so I thought, well, I'll go ask Mrs. Looper what the best way is to do this, because she's done it so many times. So I go over to her and I tell her, should I have people here and talking here and this kind of stuff. And she looked at me and she said, "Mr. Johns, this is your event. I'll follow your lead." And I thought, okay. So it was at that moment that I figured out that she had enough confidence in me that I could figure out how to do that. And that was, that was just inspirational to me. It felt like overwhelming pressure, but it really turned out great. And so that's part of my story with Claire Looper. But she was just
especially appreciate her invitation to dialogue with you. That seems to be the name of the game in the present, is to listen and to understand. Right. And so I really appreciate your illustration of that. So how does Jack Healey come into the story? 1994 rolls around, and then what happens?
And then, so we dragged Jack to Groovefest, and that was the Groovefest that was on Campus Corner. And the first day, Saturday, was the Bob Marley Festival, and the second day was the usual Groovefest. And so, we worked together with Jack to get him down there. Jack had just left Amnesty the year before, was starting his own organization. And so we brought him there to talk. And that was such an inspiration to everybody that, everybody was fired up, because Groovefest actually got started as a result of the concert tours that had been done in the 80s.
The concert tours, the Live Aid tours, there are a lot of concert tours, I hate to say for charity, but to consciousness raising events across the world in the late 80s. And in 94, we still had 4 reggae bands on Campus Corner, so it's no surprise that we kicked it off with a reggae festival. We had all our own bands for that one. And so then Jack Healey, if you could tell us a little bit of your where you've been and what you've been doing. Introduce yourself to our audience and your understanding of Groovefest.
Thanks. I think some of the folks on the call will help me bring back details because I'm getting a little old for this. But basically, my friendships with Dave and Mike and Alan and Tom Decker were really the glue that kept me coming back. And I noticed that this was becoming the Norman experience for Amnesty, and this concert idea has become, and I noticed it early on. I told those gentlemen I just mentioned that this might be and will be the longest running human rights event in the world. And I think it is. I've looked around and talked to people, and as far as I can tell, I think it is.
I think there's one in Athens, Georgia that might have us beat a couple of years, but they might not be grassroots like we are. So let's own that.
I think ours was twice a year until you did the single one. So there's a hell of a lot more than
That counts.
anybody else, I think.
Thank you. This will be our 57th event, to my knowledge, this year.
Yeah, that's amazing number. For a red state,
Man.
I mean, really, like, it's pretty special.
Yeah.
It reminds me, this had nothing to do with, you raised it earlier. There was a film by someone for the News Museum about me, Bob Geldof, and George Harrison. And so they asked me what I thought of it. I said, well, I love celebrating Irish guys. I just wanted to tell you that.
But Jack, if I could prod you by
Please.
asking the question, my first encounter that I recall with you is the one that we discussed when I was back in DC a couple of years ago about how you received such backlash for getting us young people involved and our ongoing challenging of the way that Amnesty wanted to do things, our lack of decorum and our lack of understanding the role of leadership and how the leaders of the organization were ultimately responsible for deciding what was important. And what we were saying was that we were seeing human rights in Oklahoma being something that was not respected widely. And you and I talked about some of the goings on within the board of Amnesty and your lack of appreciation by that or entity within the organization, and ultimately that leading to your exit from the leadership role of Amnesty USA. So can you talk a little bit about why young people were important to you and where that all came from?
Basically, in Lesotho as a Peace Corps director, I won't tell how or why, but I got very close to Chris Hani, the military leader of the African National Congress, and Phyllis Naidu, sort of the Rosa Parks of the African National Party, Mandela's party. There was an explosion and 2 got wounded, and we helped them out, and I ended up close to them. Very close to them over a 4.5-year period. And if you look up Chris, when he was executed right after independence, he had been prime minister. He really was a terribly bright, youngish guy. And he and Phyllis used to say to me over and over again at all our meetings and getting together and hang out together, they'd say to me, Jack, you have to go back to the United States and bring your young people behind our young people, because you know your government's never going to support us, but you can bring our young people behind the support, get the American youth behind our South African youth, because when you saw any demonstration in South Africa, it was always youthful and, really kids, grade school and high school, really. And that stuck in my head. So when I became director of Amnesty, that was in my head. And how do you do? I think the struggle with the board was always that there was a large segment of them that believed that music or concerts or things like that, it trivialized human rights. And they kind of never gave up on that. I used to tell them that while I love Yo-Yo Ma and Leonard Bernstein, who I actually got to know both of them, and they played for us at Amnesty. I was from Pittsburgh. We didn't know about Bernstein, Yo-Yo Ma. We like rock. We like, music like that. And I wasn't going to stay with it. They draw small crowds, much like jazz does. It's wonderful, but we needed to get our message out. And I felt Amnesty with 35,000 members in 1981 was like an embarrassment. I thought we just have to grow, and I want to bring young people into it. That's sort of the background to it. So when I saw your flare coming out of Oklahoma, I wanted to support it and be with it. And luckily I got to meet you guys, which was always been, a lifetime endearment for me. But you also appreciated my fight within the board. You understood the battle, and that was helpful, because it was a pretty rough time at certain moments. I remember a number of things there was a couple times there was a tent put up. I think Richard, maybe the American Indian, Whitman.
Ray Whitman, yeah.
And he helped me, with the Peltier case, gave me more background by meeting him. But you remember the frat boys peed on it every time, and they had to shut them down. They had to shut down that fraternity 2-3 times. That I was there around for that. I remember Mike taking me down to McAllister, which is a terrible ride in the desert. With stuck in the mic. I'm sure I drove him nuts. Where do you eat around here? But we would visit Scotty, the prisoner there, and I became his pen pal with Mike's help. He's later executed, but I found out in his person how the lottery existed for the death penalty, because his girlfriend, who was with him when they killed the guy, she was set free because she said he did it and I didn't do it, and she left, and she was in a bicycle gang, and we found her and tried to help the family. We met with the parents of them. We tried to help with that case, but we just couldn't get them done, couldn't save them. Dave Simmons knew Zarni, who was a speaker at one of your events, who was the leader of the Burmese and started Burma, Free Burma Now campaign. And Dave told him to look me up. And I literally, through that introduction of Dave's to Zarni, I became one of the founders of the U.S. campaign for Burma. And I became the creative director for the Aung San Suu Kyi campaign, which went rather well for her and not for us later. But it all came from Oklahoma, that relationship. We also recruited, I tried to help with recruitment. We got Francis Dunnery, I think, if I remember.
Right.
Pretty good artist. Was that his name, Dave?
Right. Was the 96? That was the 96.
96,
Yep.
Was it?
96 we did, that's the year that we did the CD.
And then one time we were demonstrating at a gas station. I don't know what we were doing there, but we were demonstrating for Aung San Suu Kyi at a gas station.
The total gas station. That's right.
The poor guy come out and begged us to leave because he felt he would support us, but who is Aung San Suu Kyi anyway? He couldn't figure out what the hell we're doing out there. So
that was great.
Well, I want to check in with you. Alan, you mentioned a couple of times of working closely with our Native community. Were there other communities of color or communities that feel underrepresented that you were working with locally? Or I have to admit, I see some really nice white guys. I'm wondering if you had any other input from other communities. And I have to admit, women on the team.
Well, is that me or you?
That's for all of you. Well, if you want to speak to women and the diversity of the growth of Amnesty International, but I'm really looking at the history of Groovefest first. If any of you want to say something about that.
There were two that I knew of. Brianna, I don't know her last name. Dave would know the last name. And then there was a young woman who was an engineer, and she was in a wheelchair, and I forget her name.
Kim Eads.
Eads, that's what it was, right. They were very critical. If I remember, Dave, they were part of your
Yeah.
team, weren't they?
Right. Brianne Toledo is
It's Toledo.
still up in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
And
I remember.
Tracy Holt and Ming Chan. I mean,
And then in
my-
some of the early ones,
Missy Hobson,
Missy and Jenny Hobson and
Patty Arnett.
I mean, I think it's the spirit has continued with
Okay, good.
Groovefest is just the number of people who played an important role and the sort of shared lifting of the weight. I mean, there's a guy, Kevin Washburn, who's now the dean of the law school at Iowa University and worked in the Obama administration, I think in the Bureau of Native American Affairs. Kevin did something that has shaped me to this day. I work in fundraising, and Kevin would always take on the task of going to the police department and asking for the noise variance. And then the next day, Kevin would take a thank you letter over there. And, and that was just brilliant, stewardship of what the event we were putting on. But it was,
Building.
no one, he did that. Everybody did some little thing that contributed to
Made it work.
the event being successful.
Well, it's important to us because we know that we're a predominantly white community, and it's something we're grappling with now is how do we include more diversity, not just in terms of, people of color, but also disability, ableism, sexism, education. We've such a diversity of community and human rights organizations and issues in Oklahoma we're trying to address that it sometimes looks performative. And it's important for us to pay attention to how much really are we listening and including stakeholders in the outcome. And that's something I know I've worked really hard on over the last 10 years. I know I have a lot more work to do, but we've definitely had more involvement from our Native community lately. And now the Arts Council is getting on board, and it's really starting to leak into the community. I mean, I'd like to say started because I'm just starting to hear from others asking honestly sometimes for Groovefest input, contribution, what's our experience been, and what are the results. And we're still kind of have an opportunity here to support human rights in issues in Norman, whether that be about social justice in the schools or in the police department or in our voting situation. So I know that the seeds of Groovefest have infiltrated the community, but it sounds like it's affected all of your outcomes. Your own work is each correlated with activism.
One of the interesting things that you mentioned about the women, I know for the first 10 years, and just looking at this picture, you can see, that Tom and Alan and Michael and everyone where's the women leadership? I know that in terms of, because we had the international students, that in terms of Central America, almost all of the other kinds of aspects of diversity, Native American, Ron King, people that were involved, we were pretty good. But almost right after Tom left, almost all of the major leaders, Aimee for the last 11 or 13 or however many years, but there was Kara Joy, McKee, Brianne, Stephanie Collins, Angela, but from then on, almost all of the leaders were female. So it was that it wasn't that we were doing something wrong. It was just sort of circumstance, I think.
No.
And
Well,
there were always pieces. Through the time that I carried weight of organizing it, there were women who were vital every single year in putting everything together. Tracy Holt and Ming Chan are the two names that come to mind off the top of my head. But I have a vivid memory of sitting outside of the administration building on campus as I was in the process of putting together pieces of a coming Groovefest. And I had a situation where there was the president of the Black Student Union was a classmate of mine, and he and I often were taking the same sides and arguments within the class. And so I said to him during class one day, hey, can we take 30 minutes after class and talk about how we can get the Black Student Union involved in the upcoming Groovefest? And we happened to go sit out on the lawn in front of the administration building, and the vice president of student affairs, I think was the title, comes walking out of the administration building, and he walked straight up to the two of us sitting on the grass. And we were both, you know, like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, what are you guys doing? I said, we're talking about how the Black Student Union can play a role in upcoming Groovefest. And he looked at the two of us and he goes, you realize if you guys can figure that out, there's not a fucking thing anybody in this building can do to change anything on this campus. And I was so happy that that was said within the context of everything. He left the conversation, and this guy who was my classmate, whose name I can't tell you because I don't recall at the moment, looked at me and he said, you know, the problem is that you guys are such entitled motherfuckers. You don't realize that we can't be involved on nights and weekends organizing the damn thing because we're just trying to put food in our mouths and keep a roof over our heads. And there was involvement, but it tended to be on the periphery because of the survival instinct and effort that they were having to put in on a day in and day out basis.
That's important. We're still trying.
I think what worked for me twice that I was there was we were in that little park, not the big open field. There would be desk after desk after desk of the liberal groups that were in Oklahoma, if I remember correctly. And
Yep.
Mike, was I right about that?
Yeah, we still do that. We have
Yeah.
vendors from
Yeah.
human rights organizations or resources
Yeah.
available to inform the public.
I thought that was valuable. One of my roles, I'll just finish. One of my roles was to raise money with the microphone to pay for the actual event itself. Brianna Toledo would help me. We would go around with our hats and collect cash from everybody sitting around the big field when we're in the big open field. Tom was better at raising that than I was, but he did it in the smaller park where it was more congested and you could mobilize it easier, and he could do that pretty well. So Tom did that. The other thing we did was, Mike Johns will know this, but there was a singer from Tulsa who was very good singer, a blues singer. What was his name?
Steve Pryor, the blues singer.
Steve Pryor. And this is a side issue, but I actually got him a contract to come back to LA, and he just couldn't bring himself together to go ahead and do that. But I thought his magic of music at those events were like a highlight for me. And then we recorded a song with him. I think Mike and I, or Dave and I, we recorded a song with him for Groovefest somewhere, and we did that. Didn't we do an album at some point too? Do I remember?
Yes, yes, we did. It was at David Teagarden's studio in south of Tulsa.
That was the Bloodbeat album with the cover from Edgar Heba Burt's.
No, that wasn't Bloodbeat. That was Steve Pryor's album called El Nino Chicken Dog.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. That's my conclusion, but I liked him. He died early in a motorcycle, I think, Mike, or something.
Right,
like
and fairly shortly before that, he did a gig, I think, in Denver, which was one of B.B. King's last gigs, and it was really pretty amazing.
No.
Like, do you have more about that, Michael Johns? About Steve?
No, that's all I know about that.
Well, the way I've always told the story, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we had Sunday in the Park, which was local art students who were trying to build community. And then, Alan, you come in with Amnesty International, is that this is an opportunity to put two together to get signatures for the petitions that you were responsible for mailing out to advocate for prisoners of conscience through Amnesty International, correct? Right?
That's right.
So in the beginning, how big would you say that crowd was? Like, give me some ballparks here.
I mean,
A couple hundred?
I'd say several hundred. I mean, we were filling Andrews Park, and then you know, you would wonder when we had time to be students, because there were many years where we would have free Groovefest on the porch at the Love
Yeah.
Light, or
Mhm.
and then we would have other, you know, Todd Walker would play
Yeah.
a show at Liberty Drug, or Tony Young and
Yeah.
Video Fish, and we sold T-shirts. I think I probably got in my attic 30 Groovefest T-shirts. I'm wearing one now.
Yay, thank
wow.
you. Oh, and we do. We all have our collection. But when Jack came, it was in the Oklahoma City Gazette, right, where we peaked around 4,500. And
No,
that's
that was 45,000. I think.
No.
I would like that to be half the city, but no, that's
No,
not.
that was the count for the weekend on the campus corner.
Oh,
And
so
the
for the
police
weekend on
actually
Campus Corner was
raised that.
45,000 for the block party.
So
See?
they said more. It was more between 40 and 50,000, I think.
You really got the
Oh.
word out. Thank you.
Well,
Thank
that
you
was
for that.
that was the letter. So Alan talked about the Kevin Washburn doing the work with the police department. The Groovefest on the corner. My memory is that Thursday or Friday of that week, a letter showed up from the police department, and the chief of police at that time said it was the lowest reported crime rate on any weekend since he'd been on the force, and he asserted that the reason for the low crime rate was that we gave all the ne'er-do-wells something to do for the weekend.
That's a hot topic these days.
Well, and for me and for those of us involved in that, I mean, that was a great victory, because we were able to bring together so many different people. And I have vivid memories of at the end of the second day, standing on the stage, and at the very back of the audience, I could see Jack standing there. And I'm standing there, having been working at the summer camp where I worked ultimately for 13 years.
Yeah.
And I was curious how many people were actually listening to me. So I used the same mechanism that I had used in the camp business. And I said, everybody listening to me right now, touch your nose. And I'm looking out over the audience there on Campus Corner, and I see everybody all the way to the back with their fingers on their nose.
Oh,
That was
we should keep that alive.
as the rain started to fall, and Richard Whitman and others who were involved were talking about how they were genuinely feeling that whoever the band was that was playing at the very end of the day that day, the electricity coming through the electric guitars as the raindrops were falling. I don't think we destroyed an amplifier or the entire electronics. Jack, you've had a few stories about that.
Yes. We lost $500,000 worth in Costa Rica on the world tour.
Oh.
During the backside of a hurricane.
Oh.
But the Nunez brothers are names that have to be brought up within the context of the critical importance early on, because it was their PA system that, as I recall, Todd Walker had ultimately sort of wrangled into existence.
For at least the first 10 years, I think. And then maybe Mark Dillon did it 1 year, and then lately it's been Mike Simons. But the Nunez brothers, the Opolis is still a major factor in Norman music scene. And of course, what was it?
Yep. We're grateful for all they do, bringing arts and music to Norman. Really, Norman music.
The support of bands like Defenestration in those early days, and Todd Mead being willing to bring the Chainsaw Kittens early on, although my memory is that the Kittens were supposed to play, and ultimately it was a reunion of Defenestration that played up to the point at which the police showed up and shut it down.
Well, and I have to say, I mean, that's no surprise, but thank you to all the musicians who've played. And really, that also is another number.
Your husband included.
Thank you. There's no Groovefest without our musicians and our artists. I mean, we can have speakers, but we need a community that's listening and having a good time. People really enjoy coming out to the park with their families. And now we're seeing generations. It's not just me and my daughter at Groovefest, but there are grandchildren at Groovefest. And so I know that we're continuing to plant seeds, even if it's through parent participation. So we are also still looking for the new youth to continue Groovefest and keep it going. So if you know of any, feel free to send them my way. So looking forward, we're moving into Groovefest on Sunday. We have Jaruba, who will be sort of headlining, telling his Clara Looper story after Sherry Dickerson from Black Lives Matter. She's the president, and they've come out the last 5 years to really try to raise awareness and listening for Black Lives Matter voices and what their needs are directly in the community, whether it's respect or grocery stores, honestly, which they desperately need for a healthy community. Then also we have Connie Johnson coming to talk about voting rights. And we have Andrew Coulter. He founded the Norman Pride Parade just last year. And so he's really made great changes in Norman, is developing diversity, and he's an activist. He's involved in everything. He's volunteering for everyone, making a big difference. So we really appreciate him. And then before that, we have Susan Herndon will be performing kind of a red dirt set. I hear she's really bringing a stout band together, not her standard Beller Council, with renowned musicians, including Randy Coyne, who apparently was president of ACLU at one point as a lawyer and also on the McVeigh team. So it's not just that our musicians perform and bring people out, but they have their own heart and message for human rights, their own commitment to human rights. And we are grateful for that. And then, we're hoping to have some more. So we're looking for speakers, and we're looking for other musicians who want to perform, but it's really a condensed Groovefest due to COVID. So it's online. We're going to try to have it outdoors still. I am so grateful for this time with you. Like, we've been talking about doing this kind of thing forever, trying to get the history out there and to talk to each other and come together. Maybe we can do it again sometime.
Well, I remember the '94 festival, Jack carrying my 1-year-old son. My son went out and visited Jack a couple of years ago. I don't think he can carry him now, but.
Right young man, boy.
Right young man.
Let me just break in. There's a documentary being done about my work. Mike, you have the link. Would you show it to everybody who's on the site now? But I ask you all not to send it to anybody else, if you would. Mike, do you have that? Do you have that?
Yeah, it's on my phone. Hang on just a minute.
So pass that to everybody, but please, everybody, don't pass it on to anybody else. And then this is the booklet Mike wants me to show people, that it's about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's a dedication to Eleanor Roosevelt and my lady who passed away a few years ago.
Can you lift that up, Jack?
Can you lift it up so we can see the cover of it?
Lift it up a little higher. Yeah.
It's for women and human rights. Is that true? That's Jack's book.
Right.
Yeah, lift it up a little higher, Jack.
Higher this way?
Yeah, that way.
Oh, that way. Keep going up.
Up.
There you go.
There we go. Yeah, we'd love to see that. It
Beautiful.
sounds like
Mike will have 100 copies. We're going to ship them out there. And I think you'll enjoy it. It's a coloring book. It's really for parents with their children to talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Yay!
And then a coloring book in the back so that you could color with your child. So it's what I've figured out in this this period.
Planting seeds.